The situation in Venezuela. The question is this the end of Chavismo? Well, as we say in Spanish, ojalá, which basically means let's hope so. It's still a bit early to really predict an endgame. But what I wanted to do first is sort of lay the foundation of why should we care on what's going on in Venezuela. First item I would mention is oil. Venezuela sits on what most people measure as the largest proven resources of oil in the world. And despite the fact that oil production under Chavismo has been declining because of inefficiency and mismanagement, the fact is that Venezuelan output is an important factor in maintaining stability of international oil prices. Second issue, why we should care about what happens in Venezuela, is also what Mike was speaking about, drug trafficking in the Western Hemisphere, and more specifically the FARC. Hugo Chavez, when he was alive, had an expressed affinity for the FARC, and that was expressed in many different ways, many tangible. Hugo Chavez saw the FARC as a key element or as a key factor in accomplishing one of his dreams, and that was driving the U.S. presence out of South America. So he, in many ways, shared many of the political agenda of the FARC, and he facilitated their involvement in narco-trafficking by turning a blind eye and even explicitly cooperating with the FARC in moving product through Venezuelan territory and airspace. There is a graphic that was, I should have brought, I just thought about it now, but the Counter-Narcotics Joint Task Force in Key West has a graphic out where they represent the drug tracks. In other words, the flights. They're coming out of South America to Central America, which is the midway point, and then up into the United States. And the composition of the drug tracks from Venezuelan territory to Honduras is about a 2 to 3 inch wide blood red streak. It is so many flights coming from Venezuela to Honduras laden with drugs that it when you say, when you think drug tracks, you're thinking just little lines close by, but this is a block like that. So, in other words, instability in Venezuela or a continuation of the current government unreformed is a threat, as a national security threat to the United States. And so, but that's by way of really laying the groundwork on why we should care. About 6 weeks ago, students in a university outside Caracas in another part of the country began protesting, and it was really the spark, the pretext was an assault on campus against a student. I think it was a woman. And this just basically crystallized a tremendous amount of popular frustration in the country about street crime. Venezuela is one of the most violent societies on earth. And that was the spark. And it began to grow, and it began to broaden in grievances, shortages of consumer goods. Why is a country that sits on the world's largest proven reserves of oil, why is it so hard to buy toilet paper in the stores? And the Cubans, the students also, people began to speak out about the pervasive Cuban presence in the decision-making bodies of the country. It became a sovereignty, nationalism issue as well. So that is what started these protests. They have spread. They are ongoing. And so far, the government has not been able to present any form of an answer. It is stuck in a belligerent mode that was really bequeathed to it by Hugo Chavez, who died about a year ago due to cancer. And his successor, Nicolas Maduro, is a tool of the Cubans. He was selected by Chavez simply because he was a trusted and reliable figure. And the Cubans could control him. And so between Chavez's nominating him and the Cubans acquiescing and surrounding him, he has really had a very rough year. Again, because of the factors that are driving the protests. In the year he's been in power, he hasn't been able to arrest the economic decline. He has presented no new ideas, and since the protests started, he hasn't had any capacity to either rein it. He can't use the military because he doesn't trust the military to. He cannot order the military to go into the streets and start shooting Venezuelan kids because, quite rightly, many will object to that. He is using poorly trained National Guardsmen, and he is using these citizens' militias, which are really paramilitary groups armed by the government that are accountable to nobody. And these are the types of folks that shoot first and don't ask any questions later. So he's relying on brute force and insults. Typical Chavez fare, insulting the students, insulting anybody who's protesting as a fascist and blah, 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 blah. So we are in a stalemated situation. The government, who are the protesters beyond the students? It's right now, because of Chavismo, Venezuela is a deeply, deeply polarized country, 50-50 probably, and 60-40, whatever. The 60 being the opponents, 40 being perhaps those who still maintain their faith in Chavismo. But these numbers reflect a deep divide. And what we can tell so far is that the students, this is mostly middle class at this point, that are taking to the streets, and youth. One thing you need to know about students in Latin America is they've historically been, the universities have historically been real hotbeds of political activism. And so it has to be taken seriously by the government. These are not pampered, college kids. They will continue to fight for what they believe in, and continue to fight for a future is what they're fighting for, actually. What we are trying to decipher is to what extent does the protest start creeping into the barrios, which is Chavismo's base, poor Venezuelans, the working poor. And if those people, to the extent that those people start moving into the opposition mode, that's going to accelerate a the final flashpoint for Maduro. I will say, while I can't predict what's the end game in Venezuela right now, I would say this, is that we've hit a tipping point. We will never go back to the status quo ante before the protests began because of the deteriorating economic conditions will not be arrested anytime soon. So the shortages, the blackouts, the difficulty finding consumer goods, inflation, the black market, all of these conditions are going to continue to pervade and to afflict Venezuelan society. What Maduro has been unwilling to do is to grant that the protesters' grievances are legitimate and to propose ways to redress them, or at least credibly address them. The reason the protests broke out is because most of the avenues that we know, institutional avenues for the venting of protests, Congress, the media, have all been shut off. So first thing Maduro has to do is to allow an airing, an institutional airing of the grievances of fully 50 to 60% of the people. And so, but that is what he's been unwilling to do. And so I don't think we go back to the status quo ante. I think that we either see Maduro try to connive his way through this by proposing what sound to be credible avenues to redress grievances, and then trying to slip out of those, or the military finally says enough's enough and move in and remove Maduro from power and put in a more moderate Venezuelan, still faithful to Chavismo, but not the radical sort that is brought on by the Cubans, the Iranians, the Russians, and all of this. What can the U.S. do? Well, and I'll wrap up with that. I think that expecting this administration to do anything, of course, is you may as well curse the darkness. Obama will not do anything, and by and large, to date, the Venezuelan protesters have been left alone. But if I was sitting in a decision-making capacity, I would say let's start pulling visas, let's start freezing bank accounts of wealthy Venezuelans, and let's hit them where it hurts. The other thing I would say is let's agree to that damn Keystone Pipeline, because that's the same type of oil that Venezuela produces, and to the extent that those refineries in the Gulf Coast can replace Canadian heavy crude with Venezuelan heavy crude with Canadian heavy crude, that would sink that government in a week. Thank you.
Jose, thank you. Before I open it up, I just have one question. General Kelly from Southern
Yes.
Command said in recent days, in a statement that's gotten a lot of attention, that Russia is increasing its military presence in Latin America in ways that we haven't seen in a pretty long time. Mm-hmm. To what extent does that development play into Maduro's calculations or the political dynamic in Venezuela generally?
Well, I think that what is probably happening behind closed doors is that Putin is most likely making promises of hard currency to get Venezuela through its problems. There is, despite all the oil, there is a huge hard currency crunch. And this government has so thoroughly wrecked the Venezuelan economy that they're rather desperate in that regard. I think that is what, that's where they'll come to the rescue. What that will allow the government to do is attempting to arrest the consumer shortages that are emptying, dealing with the empty shelves in Venezuela. And I think that probably Putin is making promises of loans and other types of economic resources at this point.
Linwood, down in the back.
Mr. Cárdenas, I'm going to reach back 30 and 60 years on this possible solution, but I was wondering, in order to get to the barrio, 60 years ago, my dad was a professional baseball player in Caracas, and 30 years ago, Reagan was engaging culturally with the Ruskies. I was wondering if, in order to get that lower middle class, lower class, athletically crazy group that likes international football, baseball, we might engage that way in bringing some of them up where they're going to be going back to tell people that, you know, the United States really doesn't stink as badly as we're being lied to, and, gee, it's good, but hit them on a cultural front as well. What's your opinion about doing some cultural warfare as well as the economic and military?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when I was in the Bush administration, we had an ambassador in Caracas, Bill Brownfield, who is currently Assistant Secretary for INL. He believed 100% in that, and he would go to the barrios. It would drive Chavez nuts. And in fact, he was so successful in practicing that art of cultural diplomacy, meeting with average Venezuelans and sharing a love of baseball, that pretty soon the government started organizing these little militias to follow him around on motorcycles and chase him out of the barrios by throwing rotten fruit at his car and stuff like that. So that reflected a real fear on the part of the governments. And I absolutely think it's an important component of our policy. But unfortunately, we have an administration today that really just doesn't care.
Gordon?
Thanks. So I'm curious to get your quick thoughts on how it will impact, the potential fall of Chavismo would impact the rest of South America. I lived in Argentina for a couple of years, about 12 years ago, and so I've watched with concern over the last several years as Kirchner has kind of followed aligned herself more closely with Chavez. And I wonder if particularly Bolivia and Argentina and some of those countries that have followed Chavez, if they will be impacted in some degree if changes happen in Venezuela.
I think that as a political force, Chavismo is running out of gas. That's not to say that we should never be content that demagoguery and anti-Americanism will ever fade from the region, but the full-blown Chavismo effect is losing its allure. And just let me give you one example. In El Salvador, we had a recent election down there, and the FMLN, which is the left-wing former guerrilla, went in. This was the second round. They went in, they won the first round. The FMLN candidate won the first round with by 10% over the right-wing, conservative Arena candidate, pro-U.S. In the second round, they barely won by 1 percentage point. And what happened between the first and second round was riots in Venezuela. So people began to see that the FMLN identified with Chavez and Chavismo, and the people going to vote for the second time, Arena played it very well. They said, "This is what you want here?" And they made up 10 percentage points in about less than 2 months. So in other parts of the region, you know, every country is a little bit different in the circumstances, because another fellow, Korea in Ecuador, still benefiting from high oil prices. Small producer, but still enough to keep a guy, to keep somebody into power. But the grand idea of, you know, class warfare and polarization, and everything that went with Chavismo, I think it's running its course. Its appeal is dying.
Claire.
Hi, Claire Lopez with the Center for Security Policy. Quick two-parter, if I might. You talked about the dominance of the Cubans in Venezuela. What about the influence of the Iranians?
Right.
And then, secondly, aren't the top military generals in Venezuela that might succeed or overthrow or replace Maduro? Aren't they deeply implicated? Aren't they the ones deeply implicated in the drug trade?
That's right. I would let me jump to Iran first. What Chavez did was what he succeeded in doing while he was alive was that he allowed the Iranians full use of the banking system of Venezuela to evade sanctions, launder money. You have to remember Venezuela being an oil-based economy, basically a first world banking system. You move billions of dollars with just a click of the button and really it raises no eyebrows. So Iran was effectively using Venezuela in that way. There are members of the Venezuelan government, as you know, Claire, that very, very close to Iran and some of the rather nefarious actors in the Middle East. They continue to be in positions of power in Venezuela. I think that that the Iranians, the Cubans, the Russians are all much more concerned about what's happening in Venezuela than our own government is, and are working behind the scenes to save it, because they get so much from that beachhead at the top of South America. Now, I suspect that as you know, this week, 3 generals, Air Force generals, were arrested. Our information is that this was just not more grandstanding by the government, but that there was real dissension, and there was a clique in the military that was prepared to move. I think that one of the worst kept secrets in Venezuela over the last couple of years is dissension in the military. Again, presence of Cubans, and just the belligerent nature of the government against its own people. So there are a number that have been designated generals, Venezuelan generals, that have already been designated by the Treasury Department as drug kingpins for their work with the FARC. I think that the salvation will probably have to come from colonels, majors, and below the leadership level. But as the case with the Air Force generals demonstrated, there remain patriotic generals.
Other questions? Mike, and if you could wait for the microphone, that'd be good.
Jose, if you could, drill just a little bit deeper in and talk about the rapid kind of expansion or growth of the IRGC Quds Force and Hezbollah presence, not only in Venezuela, but kind of throughout many places in Latin America.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I think that back in the day, 20 years ago, the locus of Hezbollah in the Hemisphere was pretty much confined to what was called the tri-border area. This is a small region where Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay meet. A smuggling center, everything. All kinds of a real Wild West area. But today, it's grown exponentially. Hezbollah is all over the hemisphere. Their primary objective is raising money through drug trafficking. They are immersed in regional drug trafficking, and they also have expanded their presence, mosques and other proselytizing entities in Venezuela. They have, when Iran sets up a a factory or another some sort of questionable entity. I mean bricks and mortar type things that you don't really know what's going inside, but there's a mosque built right next door to it. So, and we know proselytizing is going on. There's been a tremendous amount of information in the public domain about what's going on Margarita Island. Margarita Island is off the coast in the Caribbean. It belongs to Venezuela. Huge presence of Hezbollah operatives there, and also reports of training camps there. So there is a double blow of Iran and Hezbollah exploiting the region, not only to raise funds through drug trafficking, but also to proselytize. And that's something that has grown exponentially in about the last 5 years.
I think we have time for one or two more. Admiral Lyons.
Well, Claire took part of my question, but the second and third part. On the island, Roger Noriega, when he was here some time ago, talked about an operational missile base. What do you know about that, number one? And number two, how about commenting on our illustrious Secretary of State, Kerry, declaring the Monroe Doctrine dead?
Let me take the second one first, because I love bashing the administration. It's my full-time hobby, I guess. But first of all, in that speech, he actually misstated exactly what the Monroe Doctrine was. He accepted as truth what the left has called it for the last 50 years. As we know, the Monroe Doctrine was a message to the conniving governments of Europe that keep your political machinations on your side of the ocean and don't bring them here. He thought it meant that it gave the right for the United States to intervene in the internal affairs of Latin American countries, which was absolutely absurd. But that's the left's interpretation of what the Monroe Doctrine was. I think it was basically just a feeble attempt to ingratiate the administration with the left in the region, and as if they can be bought off. I mean, these people they're inveterate. It's in their DNA, and these cheap gestures like that, it's insulting is what it is. On the missile... on the missile, we're still chasing that one down. This is what's interesting in recent days, though, in recent weeks, is that there are a lot of Chavistas, meaning former colleagues of Hugo Chavez, that are completely in disagreement with Maduro and what's happening in Venezuela today. And they are increasingly looking for an escape route, and they don't want to be around when the day of reckoning comes. And so they're coming to the U.S., they're finding ways to get in or else leave Venezuela. And I know that Roger has been talking to some of them, and we're trying to see, these are people who mostly come from the financial side, but we're trying to probe and see what we can get out of a more serious issue like the one that you mentioned. Exactly.
Aaron, we'll make this the last question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments. I'm monitoring the activity down in Mexico because a lot of what you're talking about, as you all well know, is making its way through Central America into Mexico and across our border. But an interesting phenomenon has occurred in Mexico where we're seeing these vigilante groups who are fed up with the cartels operating in their community, especially in Michoacan and so forth. I was just curious if in Venezuela, if there was something similar. Is there a civilian counter to Maduro, or is there a grassroots effort where are the people, you know, fed up with these Cubans, these foreigners in their country, and do you see any of that burbling up at all?
Not to the extent where people would be taking up arms. Most of the arms that we've seen in the last few weeks are in the hands of the government sympathizers, shooting at and otherwise beating the anti-government demonstrators. The anti-government demonstrations, there are, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about a very violent society, a lot of guns for people, you know, first the crooks get them, and then the decent people get them to protect themselves. So there's a lot of weapons, guns in the society, and so there have been clashes whereby government forces have been shot at during these demonstrations, but it's been sporadic. It's nothing like a counter-revolution. Most of the like I said, the base of the protests today are the students and other folks from the middle class who are really not the type that you're going to expect to see armed at this point.
Is there a political element coming out of that group?
The protesters? Well, that's an interesting point because, and I should have made this earlier, and thank you for reminding me, is that when you look at the protests today in Venezuela, they were spontaneous, started. It sort of happened without the traditional opposition. And what happened was that the traditional opposition, the ones that have been methodically trying to gain space and challenge the government at the ballot box, they were caught flat-footed by these protests, and some tried to run and get ahead of them. Some have been not unsuccessful in doing so. Some were reluctant to join arm in arm with people protesting in the street, figuring that you know, it may be too dangerous. Others have embraced the protesters in the opposition. But the thing one of the most interesting things about this Venezuela protest is its spontaneous, organic nature, and not opposition-led in terms of the formal opposition. Now they're scrambling to try and see how they can sort of harness this force into something that they can ride towards electoral victory. But I don't think anybody in Venezuela right now is thinking about electoral politics right now in terms of those people in the street.